This is Seeking Delphi, episode number 35, NASA, the Next 10 Years. Thanks for joining me. I'm Mark Sackler. The future lives here.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
For those of us of a certain age, the sounds and images of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions that led to that giant leap forward 50 years ago are forever etched in our cultural DNA. They were, in part, what made us who we are today. But the progress of the 60s, driven by the Cold War and the ideological struggle between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, slowed dramatically after the manned lunar landing was achieved. The public lost interest and budgets plummeted. It seems that technological progress isn't always exponential. It moves, at least within specific fields, in the fits and starts of an S-curve, or what futurists call punctuated equilibrium. It accelerates in times of stress or need, and then levels off during periods of implementation and stability. The Cold War was a period of stress and need, even if artificially fueled by ideological conflict. Progress has been comparatively minuscule in subsequent decades. Minuscule, that is, until now. A new space race with multiple players has emerged. The European Union, China, Japan, and India, along with many commercial space ventures, most notably Elon Musk's SpaceX and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, have all joined the fray in a race to exploit resources and perhaps eventually colonize the solar system. How does NASA fit into all of this? I recently spoke to Dan Dumbacher. He's executive director of AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and formerly Director of Launch Systems at NASA. Be sure to listen to the end for the announcement of a very special new space event. Here's that interview. Dan, welcome to Seeking Delphi. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, glad to be here, Mark. It's a privilege.
Well, Dan, to begin with, you were a stalwart for a few years at NASA, and we'd like to hear a little bit of your background for just a couple of minutes, what led up to NASA, and of course your current role with AIAA.
Sure, be glad to do that. I started at NASA as a summer student, working on Space Lab thermal analysis and Space Shuttle main engine propulsion analysis, and then got to do some cool things in my career, a lot of it shuttle, but also DCX, XA, vertical lander, X-33 flight test. Unfortunately, we didn't fly that one. X-37, which is still flying. And I ended my career at NASA as the program director for what we now call the Space Launch System, Orion, and the ground system. So the rockets and the spacecraft to take people to the moon and Mars. From there, I went to teach engineering at Purdue University for 3.5 years. And then AIAA called me up and said, how would you like to come join us? And so here we are.
So Dan, our primary discussion is where NASA is going to be going in the next maybe 10 years and beyond based on present plans. But let's go a little shorter term. The Orion capsule that has been, I think, had a few delays and is needed for NASA to have its own human astronaut space launch system. So where do you see that right now? Is it gonna be there in time for their proposed 2024 return to the moon?
Well, actually, Orion is proceeding rather well as the Space Launch System. And you're right, complicated projects like this have delays as you learn things because you're doing things that are stretching the laws of physics. Orion, actually, we did a flight test back in 2014 of the Orion capsule that was rather successful. It went out to orbit the Earth, the furthest we'd ever gone since Apollo, and the test was very successful, particularly on the heat shield. The first test mission for Orion, the first flight vehicle in addition to that test vehicle I just talked about, is in current final assembly and integration at the Kennedy Space Center, getting ready for launch in the 2020, 2021 timeframe, whatever. I can't remember exactly where NASA is on that right now, but they're making good progress on that. Heat shields installed, they're putting all the equipment in, and Orion's looking good for that kind of work. Space Launch System is also progressing well. They are in the final assembly and integration at the Michoud Assembly Facility near New Orleans, and that stage will soon go over to Mississippi at the Stennis Space Center for stage testing. And once it completes the stage testing, it will then go to Kennedy Space Center to get ready for the launch.
Now, I've seen there's some other potential milestones, hurdles, whatever, that need to be reached before going back to the moon in 2024. I know one of them is a new spacesuit is in the works. There hasn't been a new one apparently in about 40 years, and that would probably be a good idea. How's that going, and are there any other significant hurdles that still have to be reached? Obviously, you need a lander.
Well, you need all kinds of things. You need a lander, which NASA's working on. You need the spacesuits. NASA actually made an announcement yesterday. They showed their new spacesuit at NASA headquarters with the design team that's working on it. I hesitate to use the word hurdles because this going to space and getting to orbital velocity of 17,000 miles an hour is a hard thing to do, and then traveling 240,000 miles is a difficult thing to do. And there's lots of testing ahead. The Orion spacecraft has some fair amount of testing it still has to do. It will soon be doing that up near the Glenn Research Center. Then the Space Launch System has the big stage testing. All of that's in work. The spacesuits are working. NASA has put out announcements and procurement opportunities for the landing system, so that's in work. The Gateway power propulsion element has also been started. So NASA knows what it needs to do, and they have all of the elements in work and in place, and they're doing everything they can to make 2024 happen.
So in your estimation then, is 2024 still a reasonable target?
2024 is an interesting discussion. My standard answer to those kinds of things is it depends on the budget. The technical team is ready, willing, and able to do it. The NASA team, the industry team is all there. It's a matter of getting the right amount of money at the right time so that you can keep the projects moving the way they should be moving to meet the scheduled date. It will be a challenge to make 2024. We all know that, like we've said, going to space is hard, but it is an excellent goal to be pushing towards. It brings out the best in us, and I think the agency, NASA, and all the industry team is doing everything they can to make 2024 happen. Even if they come up short a little bit and it's 2025, that's okay. It's still quicker than the original plan. So, they'll do it. They'll keep working on it really hard, and we'll see how it goes. I have confidence in the team that we do the right thing at the right time, and we'll fly when we're ready. They have the goal, and they're working hard toward it.
Yeah, well, money, of course, is always an issue. And what a lot of people don't realize, maybe people who aren't of that era, was that what was going on in the 1960s was a little bit of an artificial motivation with the Cold War and the race to beat the Soviet Union to the moon, is that we were, in terms of percentage of the federal budget, dedicating a lot more resources to the effort to getting the moon than we do today. So bringing up money is obviously a good point. Now, beyond the moon, where else do you see manned flight going in the next decade and beyond? When even not getting to Mars, are there? I think I heard somewhere the talk of maybe a space station orbiting the moon, maybe a trip to an asteroid or something, or things like that on the table?
There have been all kinds of options out there, and that's one of the struggles NASA has, is the plans have changed a few times on them. The steps are actually kind of basic. There is the trip to the moon, getting humans back to the moon, and figuring out and exploring the parts of the moon that we have not explored yet. We have a lot to learn about the moon that we did not get out of the Apollo missions, the Apollo missions, were fundamentally at the equator, around the equator of the moon, and on the near side of the moon that faces Earth. There are still the poles and the back side of the moon to be explored. So there's lots to do there. The Gateway system will be put in place. NASA's plan for the Gateway system serves as kind of think of it as a little bit like a bus station for activities to go to the moon. You get to the Gateway from Earth, and then you go to the moon, and eventually the Gateway will be the stepping off point for going to Mars. Because once you get out of Earth's gravity well, it's going to Mars from the moon will be from the moon's orbit will be a little bit easier than doing it from Earth. So the steps are the moon with Gateway, and then you put the capabilities in you need to at Gateway to go to Mars, and then you go to Mars. In the past, there have been proposed missions to go to an asteroid. Those are not on the books right now. However, the capability that NASA is building with Orion, the Space Launch System, and the Gateway will give us that opportunity if we choose to go there. This is exploration. Exploration fundamentally means that you're learning along the way, and the plans we have today will be changed by what we learn along the way, and that's the good thing about this. NASA is building the capabilities either through either through people like SpaceX, Blue Origin, it's Boeing, Northrop Grumman is building all those capabilities so that it opens up the opportunities of where we can go based on what we learn along the way.
So you mentioned the Gateway, but could you be a little more specific to us? What exactly is the Gateway? Is that on the moon? Is that in orbit or in between the Earth and the moon somewhere?
It's actually in lunar orbit. It will be in lunar orbit. And it will be a place where instead of making the lander handle all of the job of getting to the surface of the moon from Earth orbit or from high lunar orbit, Gateway allows us to get the hardware there and then get the astronauts there, and then gives us an easier, smaller lander that's needed to go to the surface of the moon. So, I describe it as kind of a bus station, kind of a setup where the landers would come from the lunar surface up to the Gateway and go back. The astronauts would come to the Gateway from Earth, and then we'd carry out whatever missions they need to be carried out. So it's in lunar orbit, and it's there to give astronauts and scientists the opportunity to either go to the surface of the moon or also to operate facilities or smaller landers on the surface of the moon and operate those remotely from the Gateway so that we can maybe go do more exploring and do it quicker.
More about Mars and how that has to do with NASA's relationship with some of the space commerce enterprises out there, but I'm going to first go a little more near term about other stuff, what other projects that are going on. And the first one comes to mind are space telescopes for things like looking for near-Earth asteroids that might be a threat to the Earth. And then also, of course, there are the exoplanet finding possibilities as well. So what's going on in the space telescope world for the next foreseeable few years out to 10 or 15?
Well, the biggest thing that's going on in the Space Telescope arena is the James Webb Space Telescope, which I think is planned to launch in 2021. That will go to an orbit between the Earth and the Sun so that it can actually extend back in time further than we can see with the Hubble Space Telescope. So it's going to greatly expand our ability to do pure science. I believe it will get used for some of those other activities you mentioned as well. It'll be up to the scientists to determine how it actually gets used. There are other telescope activities in place, WFIRST and a couple others. And you're right, there's a lot of exoplanet work going on, looking at asteroids. And it's not just NASA that's doing all of this. It's also work going on with the European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, and others that are all doing this work, and there's a fair amount of international collaboration in that arena to help expand our capabilities.
So let's move on to probably what most people see as the most ambitious thing on the horizon, even for the next 20 years, and that is manned flight to Mars. There may be greater biological hurdles than there are engineering hurdles, and I don't know how up you are on that, but between dealing with the microgravity getting there and the low gravity on Mars, for possibly extended periods of time, and obviously radiation, is progress being made in addressing those potential problems? Because to me, that's almost bigger than engineering. But again, again, we can talk about budgetary and engineering issues as well. How prepared is NASA to deal with all this stuff and get there by the 2030s?
So that's a good question, Mark. There's significant research going on in that arena to understand the radiation effects on humans, how that affects long-term human health in spaceflight. A lot of that work is going on the International Space Station right now. There are also other platforms, but the primary work is going on with the space station. There is also the need to understand the microgravity environment. The Twins event that we had that we did with Space Station, or that NASA did with Space Station, to learn to track how the human DNA changes over time, and with a direct comparison to Earth. So the microgravity, the partial gravity, is also an interesting question in that how the human body reacts over the long term to 1/6 gravity for the moon, and then what humans will experience on Mars, is all part of a fair amount of research that NASA's been doing in the microgravity life sciences world. That is, as you pointed out, is very important. And there's also another interesting element of this, in that a lot of that research, there's also research in the human psychology, human space flight, particularly as the first humans go so far away from home being Earth, and being away from family, being away from friends, and how does that affect people psychologically? And there's a lot of research needed on that front as well. And all of that's in work as part of what NASA's doing and some other research entities that are helping out. But it's all NASA's working on all of those problems to help address long-term human spaceflight.
Okay, so obviously there are money challenges, there are technological challenges. So how can NASA get there on its own, or do we get into this some kind of marriage with the SpaceX's, the Blue Origins, contractors that NASA has used in the past, but maybe they have to rely on their not just on their traditional engineering, but their space commerce divisions that are developing their own capabilities?
So the one thing I will say off to that very good question is that NASA doesn't do any of this alone. NASA is a government agency that relies on industry and contractors to actually build the hardware, and also to build it, test it. And also NASA is getting more and more out of the operations business and turning that over to private industry. So you need all of the industry partners, and that does include the SpaceX's, the Blue Origins, the Northrop Grummons, that are delivering cargo to station and are working on commercial services to get astronauts and crew up to the space station. All of this has to work together. All of this is part of the overall system, part of the overall exploration ecosystem. And all of the pieces have to work and interplay together very well. So it's essential that as NASA takes on the role of moving and extending the human neighborhood further out, that it starts to turn over some of the functions it has done traditionally, like operate space missions in low Earth orbit. That gets turned over to private enterprise. It's very similar in concept to how the government helped address the technical challenges of aeronautics and airplanes and actual atmospheric flight back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that led to the commercial aviation industry that we have today. NASA is in that role. NASA's pushing the envelope and then relying on industry to be able to build the hardware, test the hardware, and begin to take on some of the operations, so that NASA just buys services and gets out of the operational mode and focuses more on the longer term, harder, more challenging risks that need to be addressed before private industry can take on those jobs.
Okay, because there's a feeling, if you look at some of Elon Musk's pronouncements, and I know we maybe should take him with a grain of salt, because he tends to be overly aggressive, but that he does do some amazing stuff too, and he already has with SpaceX. It's sounding like he wants to get there by 2030, early 2030s, do or die, with or without NASA. But really, can NASA do it without the Elon Musk? Can Elon Musk do it without the NASAs? I'm just curious to know if there's any disconnect there, either in goals or communication.
Well, I don't think the goals are in conflict. The communication may be, but the reality of it is that Elon and what SpaceX does and what Blue Origin's doing has built, and the successes they have are built upon investments that the government has made via NASA and other government agencies up until now. All of the Orion parachute data that NASA did in developing the NASA parachutes was provided to Elon for SpaceX for their use in designing their parachutes. There is NASA heritage in some of the work for the propulsion systems for Falcon 9 and Falcon 9 Heavy. So even going to the point where the government made investments back in the mid-90s on vertical landing of rocket systems. The DCX-A flight test vehicles back in the mid-90s. And a lot of that investment isn't necessarily visible in terms of hardware, but it's visible in terms of the people that worked on those programs in the mid-90s. Some of them were also have been involved with Blue Origin and SpaceX in developing their vertical landers. So that investment in building the skill base, building the capabilities in terms of knowledge, understanding the issues and the engineering capability has been built up over time. And so that's why I like to emphasize that this is an ecosystem that is interrelated, and no one piece can be successful without the others. For SpaceX and Blue Origin to be successful, there has to be a market. For there to be a market, NASA has to help start it. The government has to help start it. The government also has to help address those technical challenges and reduce the risks, so that private enterprise feels like it has the opportunity, even with market risk, to be able to make a viable, profit-making entity out of it. So all of this is interrelated. It all plays together, and all of it's necessary to be successful as we continue to work towards commercializing low Earth orbit, getting to the moon, utilizing the moon and what we learn there, and then extending and eventually going on to Mars with humans.
All right, let's get to one additional interesting area that people talk about, and there's maybe some effort in NASA, maybe a little more out there, and that, of course, is the search for signs of extraterrestrial life. And we're going to stay away from the really far out, the ET stuff, and deal with more almost mundane, but obviously it's not mundane because it's extraterrestrial, if you want to be literal, within our solar system. And there's two things of interest, and it's resurfaced, and I know he's been talking about it for decades, and for some reason it's come up again. Gilbert Levin, who was one of the scientists who helped design the first organic molecule test for life on the Viking lander, is again out there in the news saying that he believes it showed signs of life. So I'd be curious your take on that, and NASA's take on what they're going to be doing near term on Mars. And then also, of course, there is the talk of Europa and a mission there that might help further shed light on whether there might be the conditions that would be viable for life in the sub-ice ocean.
I'm one of those, being an engineer and spending most of my life working on launch vehicles and rocket propulsion and those kinds of things. I'm one of those that firmly believes that if we do find extraterrestrial life, which it's indicating that the probability of that is increasing. That will be a real game changer. And there will be so much for us to learn from that, and so much maybe opportunity out of it. But number one, what all we learn from that, how that life, if we find it, has evolved on other celestial bodies, will be informative and help us understand our own human condition better. We have only been on one planet out of many, many, many. We've only lived here, and who knows what's out there. I'm one of those that wants to go explore and go find out. And I think some of the indications that we're seeing with what we've learned on Mars, what we've learned out of the Viking experiments, what we've learned through the 50 plus years history of space exploration, that we are not as smart as we think we are. And we have a tremendous amount to learn, and let's go find out.
Well, that's a pretty good answer, and we might move on to an expert in the area at some point to go deeper into it for a full-length podcast. But let's finally get to wrap this up to something that AIAA has going on and set for next year in Las Vegas called Ascend. And I understand there's a lot of excitement about this conference. So tell us about it, what's going to be involved, and what it's going to accomplish.
Well, thank you for that question, Mark. Ascend is AIAA, what we're trying to do to help bring the space ecosystem together to go solve and address these challenging problems that you've brought up, and to help move this all forward, to help move the commercialization of low Earth orbit forward. How do we get to the moon quicker? How do we getting to the moon and utilizing the moon and extending even further out to Mars? There is so much work to be done and so many challenges to be addressed that we saw the need to pull together the larger space ecosystem that's doing the work, and those that are typically viewed as being outside the space ecosystem, the economists, the business majors, the policy makers, and bring all of that together so that the economic, the business discussions, the policy discussions are informed by the technical work that's going on, and the technical work is informed by the economic and the policy. So we saw the need to bring this ecosystem together, to bring them together on an annual basis to address challenging questions and challenging problems, and to be intentional about driving towards outcomes. So that each year, as we learn more and more, people learn, the industry, the ecosystem learns more throughout the course of the year, that we take advantage of that and then use it to go take the next step on the challenging questions, so that we continue to proactively build progress and help accelerate the progress in space commercialization and space exploration.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's going to be, would have to be a very diverse group of people in the aerospace industry, from government agencies like European and NASA and some of their suppliers, and also the space commerce group. So that sounds like it could be very exciting. And we're talking, I believe it's November of next year?
It's November 16th through the 18th next year in Las Vegas, as you pointed out. We believe it's very unique in the sense that with the AIAA technical foundation and technical heritage and the ability to pull all the people together, that we do this. We bring in the emerging markets, the adjacent markets, those that might not even know that they could have a play in space exploration, bring everyone together to help build the excitement, address the issues, and make tangible progress year by year, and help make that progress quicker. You know, great ideas and great progress comes out of the combination of people's minds and thoughts and results and sharing and working with each other, and that's what Ascend is all about.
Well, that does sound really excellent, and I'll tell you what, as we wrap this up, I will right now extend an invitation to you just about exactly 1 year from now, a month ahead of the event, to come back on and give us a bit of a preview of some of the presentations and whatever that will be and the discussions that will be going on there. If that's good with you.
Oh, thank you for that opportunity, Mark. We will definitely take you up on that one.
So thank you again for your time. This will be, as I said, as this goes to air, it will be probably right after Ascend has been made public at this year's AIAA meeting in DC. And I thank you for being with me and look forward to having you on again.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark. And thank you for the opportunity. And we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Be sure to be listening to Seeking Delphi over the 12 months leading up to the inaugural Ascend event, as we'll be covering many of the topics discussed in today's program in depth. Be sure to subscribe to Seeking Delphi on Apple Podcasts, Player FM, YouTube, or one of the other outlets linked on the Seeking Delphi website. You can follow Seeking Delphi on Facebook or me, Mark Sackler, on Twitter. Special thanks to Interpros for providing today's interview with Dan Dumbacher. Until next time, thanks for joining me.